the recording, and then I'm going to spotlight. I'm going to mute myself.
Well, tell us what you're doing.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Okay, I have in front of me a white box, the Q&A box. Maybe I can just move that over. Aha. Okay, terrific. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming to our second PW Women's, Presbyterian Women's program this month for October. And I'm Julie McGrath. I'm your committee chair, I guess, for this this program. And I'm in my second year, and I want to thank the committee that's been working on this. I think we've all had a really good time pulling together the programs for this year. One is that, given the time of COVID, we wanted to, make sure that we address the stress that goes along with these unprecedented times. Secondly, we wanted to also help us do a deeper dive into anti-racism and what that means and how we can learn and just become more aware. So those are kind of two of the themes that you'll see for the program this year. So the team is Blair Tuning, who's also our moderator, of course, Miranda Reynolds, Barbara Glenn, Neely Barnhart, and Susan Wingfield Douglas. And we've had a lot of fun times in figuring out what would be the best mix for this year. And of course, our virtual format is very different than what we've had in the past. We're going to miss some of our camaraderie that we get from sitting at the tables and talking to people and chit-chatting before and after. But that's one reason that what we've done is we're adding a process so that people can come early. If you were there today, it was a little rough because you had to type in the fact that you were there and what was on your mind. And so we're gonna smooth that out a little bit next time. But please, we are invited to come each and every month to the early chat time to check in, let us know that you're there. And so then there usually will be an icebreaker question. So like today it was, what's bringing you joy at this time? And we'll have a rotating list of those. Let's see, what do I want to tell you? So we're using, just to let you know, sort of the format for what we're going to be doing each month. We're using Zoom webinar, which is a different format than some of the Zoom meetings we've been in. So you'll only be able to see our speakers, me occasionally, Blair occasionally, and Wilson occasionally. And but we'll also be able to see our speakers' slides, videos, dancing, whatever it may be that they bring to their presentation. So we'll be able to see those, and that's where their focus will be. What else do I want to tell you? And then if you've attended a covenant class, that's pretty much what the format is like. So each week, one of the members of the team that I mentioned before will introduce the speaker, and they have spent time getting to know that person. They've recruited that person and gotten them to say yes, they would come. And so the topics will be very timely. And today it's going to be Blair who's going to introduce our speakers in a couple of minutes for what I think is a really timely discussion, certainly for me, if no one else. And we encourage you to ask questions during the presentation today. So we'll be monitoring what the questions are, and we'll be interrupting the presenters for, whenever it seems appropriate and we get a couple questions, we'll interrupt them, ask the questions, and then they can go back to the presentation. And the way that you're going to do that is if you go to the bottom, if you take your cursor and go to the bottom of the screen, there is a section called Q&A. And if you can click on that, and then the chat will, on the side, will still be there if you want to send a note to someone. But if you want to ask a question, if you could put them in the Q&A, I'll be monitoring that. I'll bet Blair will also be monitoring that. and we'll try to get those to the speakers. And there'll also be a Q&A time at the end of their presentation. So one way or another, we'll get to them. Each time we do these, we get better and better. We get smoother and smoother. And we had a couple, possible hiccups today. I mean, I lost my internet, so it took me a couple minutes to get back on. And but this is going to be a great year from a programming standpoint. We really have Wilson and Carolyn to thank for pulling this all together. I call them the Wizard of Oz role. They've been terrific in helping us out, even coaching us right before this meeting today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand this over to Blair, who I can see her, she's right next to me, and she's going to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Julie. I started to say I'm delighted to see so many familiar faces when actually I'm just seeing your names, but I can visualize your faces, and I'm glad you're here and glad to see that we have some new people joining us as well. For those of you who are new to the church or our guests today, I'm Blair Tuning, the moderator for Presbyterian Women here at FPC. I join Julie in thanking Wilson Kennedy for graciously once again serving as our Zoom host for today, and thank Julie for moderating the conversation with our speakers. I say conversation because that's what our presenters indicated to me they wanted. They want this to be an open dialogue so they can address our issues and needs. So be sure to send in your questions once they get started. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce our speakers today. A licensed clinical psychologist, Dr. Matt Bitsko is the founder and director of Summit Emotional Health, a practice here in Richmond dedicated to helping individuals and families grow, connect, and thrive. Offering a wide range of approaches and therapeutic solutions, Summit's goal is always the same: to help one achieve the insight and skills that lead to lasting emotional health and resilience. Matt received his doctorate from VCU and completed his internship and postdoctoral fellowship at Virginia Tech. He has served on the faculty of Children's Hospital of Richmond at VCU for 11 years, and his specialty is treating mood, anxiety, and adjustment disorders. A two-time recipient of Richmond Magazine's Top Docs Award, Matt is a husband and father of 3, who he says teach him more than any textbook could. And I'm pretty sure our very own Mary Connor will tell you that Matt is a wonderful neighbor. Joining Dr. Bitsko today is Dr. Brynn Moore. A native Texan, Bryn is one of the newest psychologists to join Summit's practice, moving to Richmond with her husband just this past June. With degrees from the University of Texas and University of South Carolina, and a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Minnesota Medical School, gosh, you get around, Bryn. She specializes in neuropsychological assessments and therapy services primarily for children and adolescents. Dr. Moore has received special training in the diagnosis and treatment of a host of illnesses and disorders that present in childhood, including PANDAS. Given these amazing credentials and a personal recommendation from Margaret Holland, who heard Dr. Bitsko address the Parents Association of Freeman High School this past spring, I'm sure you can see why the program committee felt this was a most important and timely topic for our group. Dr. Bitsko, Dr. Moore, welcome to First Presbyterian.
Thank you so much, Blair.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie and Wilson and everybody else. That is a lot of pressure to start with. Let's just get that out right now. And Blair, if we ever do commercials or anything else, we're going to be hiring you for that. So I can't thank you enough for starting us off, and now our palms are sweaty and everything else. So please ask questions to kind of get us off topic here. It is our delight to be here. Very thankful to be here and to spend the time with you guys today. It's a really nice shift for Bryn and I to be able to take some of the same content that we do talk about with our clients every day, with high schools and with parents and with the YMCA, and to be able to come to a format like this because it's an intersection of our lives as well. So we're really very, very happy to be here. The one thing I would say, just to keep going with the sentiment that both Julie and Blair said, is we would like this to be not only interactive, but specific to your questions. What Bryn and I are going to do is run through this presentation for about 25 or 30 minutes, but it's okay if we get stopped at some points in between, and certainly we'll be sure to leave about 10 or 15 minutes towards the end. But we do want it to be something that is specific to you, because some will be very basic in general, and some will kind of dive into some more specific issues. So with that, are we all set with the screen, Blair? Everything looking good?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
So, you know, one of the things in talking about mental health currently is we wanted to talk about just why is this time so challenging for everyone? And of course, you know, if we think about, this is a model of development by Yuri Bronfenbrenner, who was a developmental psychologist. And just as a reference point, the way that we look at this model is that each concentric circle is considered a system that has an impact on the individual. And so, of course, if we think about all of the different things that are going on right now, including, you know, COVID, politics, uncertainties with employment, all of these different things, it's going to be that the center is going to become more and more pressured and difficult because of the other circles are very uncertain. So as I said, you know, the future is very, very uncertain currently. And it's been said that in day-to-day life, any of 30 to 50% of our self-generated thought, so thought that is not focused on something that we're concentrating on, is looking toward the future, which is generally a positive thing, because very often future-oriented thinking is exciting. We have a lot of possibilities in the future. It leads to thinking about possible realities and encourages problem solving. However, when we're in times of uncertainty, it can lead to, and it's accompanied by pessimism, it can lead to feelings of hopelessness, and it can further increase sadness. And then you add to that, within the mindfulness literature, we talk about our monkey mind, which is kind of this part of your mind that is your inner critic. And it's very difficult to calm down and control. And so you add that, we have this uncertainty, and then we have this inner critic that's telling us, you're doing it all wrong. Why can't you get a control of this? And it just further increases anxiety, isolation, and withdrawal.
Some other things to say about this slide. I often joke about psychology because we find anything to do research on. And if you Google just about anything, there's probably something that's been found or been studied prior. So it wasn't much of a surprise to me that the psychology of pandemics versus the psychology of uncertainty, there's a lot of good information out there. When we talk about COVID-19, I say this because it's a way for all of us to know that what we're experiencing, what we're thinking and feeling is probably not novel, but it lets us still give enough grace to ourselves as far as, all right, this is probably what's going on for myself and maybe all of us. And then how do I deal with that? Some examples about COVID-19 and any kind of pandemic, it's different than a lot of other very tragic things that happen throughout our culture. When you compare it to terrorism, to natural disasters, something like a pandemic like COVID-19 is especially isolating. And of course, we all know that, but even in our worst recent example and in our history with 9/11, those 2 years after 9/11 were the only 2 years in about 30 or 40 years when the suicide attempt and the suicide rate actually went down. And that's kind of noteworthy because as traumatic and as emotional as that experience was for all of us, there's something about natural disasters, there's something about terrorist attacks which can be unifying. On the very opposite end of that spectrum, something like a pandemic is very isolating. And there's rarely things that can unify us during that time. And then finally, within the whole notion of these times and with the uncertainty, we all know that our emotions ebb and flow even more drastically. So if we have a good day, if we have a good interaction, a really good moment, we might be able to be lifted up because things are uncertain in a very strong way, versus if we have a couple of losses or things that aren't going our way, it really might kind of take us down. So we have to be aware of how our emotions and things might just ebb even more and more. Anything else on this one? So here again, these are some things that have been happening for us since these times going on. We have increased worry, irritability, burnout. You can read all those things there. To address and manage these, we try to accommodate. Like Bryn was saying, we might, some of those automatic thoughts that would come in, we might ruminate and kind of think about the negative aspects, which if you think about how our brain's even wired, we are kind of hardwired to look about danger and things that might harm us first, and especially when we have civil and racial unrest, when we have a pandemic, when we have all these things going on within the world, our nation, and then within our own family, culture, neighborhood. It shouldn't surprise us, but we have to pay attention to the fact that our minds and our hearts often are trying to keep us safe, so we go to some of the things that could go wrong. And that's just another way that our lives and our minds and our hearts can kind of get out of balance over these times. One of the things, and I'll bring it up, and if you guys have questions or if you wanted to talk about it further, these are a list of symptoms that most of us would have. And I know we're sitting here speaking to a women's group, and one that was not put in here, but we were talking about was anger. And if it's anger, stereotypically, we always talk about men. Well, men get angry and everything else, and that is true, and we could do a whole separate topic on that. But I think it's only fair to say, of course, so many women in this world, so many women in our culture, because they have to hold on to so much, and that might be the role that they play within the family. That's what a lot of clients tell me. That's when I'm speaking to my own wife, and if she was on this, she would tell me, because of the roles that so many women play, there again, stereotypically, they just have to hold on to so much. They have to navigate what's going on with the kids, each of the kids, minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. And the responsibilities that go with having to hold, navigate, and juggle all those things are, of course, going to be very overwhelming. So you might see aspects of anger that kind of plays into that.
Relatedly, which this flows very nicely into, is that unfortunately, COVID-19 and all of the changes associated have had a differential impact on women in comparison to men. Much of that has to do with loss of unpaid childcare and the expectation that the woman is going to account for that by either leaving their job or the fact that women's career choices in general tend to be more gender specific and more at risk for loss. So things like accommodations, food service, retail, all of the things that were closed down during COVID-19. And so, as Matt was saying, one of the unfortunate things that has happened, and I think this is just the nature of women in general, is that we take on responsibilities for things that were never intended to be ours. And so those include things like other people's emotions, other people's attention, other people's time, especially if you have children, it becomes automatically your responsibility to deal with. And I think one of the major things we're going to hit on today is learning how to set boundaries with those things to take care of yourself. Because to center this biblically, we being made in the image and the likeness of God, God has boundaries. God is very specific about who he is, what is his responsibility, what is not his responsibility. And given that, we are expected to do the same thing. It's very difficult when there are so many people in our lives, but it's an essential skill to learn how to do, especially now, but it can have a very big impact long term. And so some ways that we can start to do that are to lean on a support network like this. I mean, this is a wonderful source of connection for everyone, a place to lean on for support, to look for guidance and advice. A resource that I wanted to share with all of you that I think is great is, see if I can click on this. So on leanin.org, they focus a lot on all of these different resources. They've compiled a host of resources of ways to support women during COVID-19. So, you know, it talks about connecting, juggling work and home, managing stress and uncertainty, the things that we're talking about today. What's really great about this is for each one, you can click on them and they take you to a host of different articles from, you know, CNN, from Wall Street Journal, all of these different resources that you can turn to of, okay, how can I have difficult conversations with my boss about setting boundaries for working from home? How can I have conversations with my kids, with my spouse? All of those different sorts of things. So leaning on these things for support is a really great resource. So as we said, disruption is really expected during this time, and there are a number of ways that we actually can thrive during this, because it has the opportunity, right? Even though we feel this sense of disconnection and this anger, really, if we are to hone in and set some structure and some boundaries for ourselves, and to be graceful and gentle with ourselves, we can greatly enhance our resilience and the resiliency of our families in this time. There we go. So I like to use the analogy of when we're on an airplane, the first thing that they tell you is to put your own oxygen mask on first before helping those around you. And again, I would say gender-wise, it's typically the approach of most women to try to help everybody else instead of helping yourself first. So I think that's a really important point to address, that you have to take care of yourself first and to be gentle with yourself in this time. As I mentioned earlier, that the idea of the monkey mind, right? That inner critic is going to tell you repeatedly, you're not doing this well enough, you're not productive enough, you're not getting everything done. There's no way to be perfect, number one, and there's also no way to do everything equally well. So this is a really great time to look at, you know, what is your definition of productivity? What makes you feel good? And can we maybe redefine productivity? Maybe productivity means spending time with your kids every day. Maybe productivity means, I heard some of you earlier talking about learning new skills. That's a great way to shift, saying I've been productive in this way. And that sense of accomplishment can be really empowering and helpful long-term, as well as empowering to the people around you, because it's great modeling. I mentioned boundaries a bit earlier. It's essential that we be able to set healthy boundaries with ourselves and our time, at work, with the people in our lives, with our consumption of the media. It is difficult to set boundaries with those sorts of things because they generally increase some of the feel-good hormones in our mind, and we'll talk about some of that a little bit later, but it actually in the long run can decrease our enjoyment of face-to-face time or more mindful activities. So it's really important that we do things like setting a schedule for ourselves, having a dedicated workspace if you are working, not working at the kitchen table, for example, because you can't ever leave then. And there's a lot of psychology behind where you do your work. You know, then you're eating dinner and you're thinking about work because you've been sitting there all day long. You know, being kind of mindful of those schedules and timelines with your kids. Talking to your spouse about how do we change chores, or how do we change who is responsible for what, and can we be flexible with that? And other than that, really finding enjoyable time for yourself, even if it's 5 minutes during the day to sit down and read, to go for a walk, to listen to some music while you take a bath or a shower. It doesn't have to be, a long-term thing. It can be something short.
Yeah, I was just going to say one more quick thing about that, which is what you just spoke about. Start really small. Start very, very small, and it could be very brief, because we all sit here, and even though we all know this, especially in those quieter times when we might know that we might need to do something just a little bit different, I've always talked to clients, and I have to talk to myself as far as if I need to just kind of shift things, and I might come up with some things that are pretty moderate to severe that I feel need to be shifted. It's always made me feel better, and to kind of take that breath, and I'm like, all right, what's the smallest thing that I can do for myself? What is just, even if it's 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and if I've done that, if I do that differently one day, then that's something that'll just be different. So I know it makes sense. We all know it, and I know that sometimes it can feel very daunting, but start small. Okay, so what we want to talk about with this slide talks a little bit about, of course, positive touch, and we can go all across the ages. I mean, there's a lot of great research. For those of you who have kids, that no matter what the age, physical touch, positive touch is very essential, whether the child's 1 week old, 10 years old. And there's a lot of great information and research that says even during adolescence, any kind of sitting next to each other on the couch, throwing a leg over each other, hugs, even then, adolescents are actually the ones that are most starved for the physical contact. And it's one of those ages when that kind of goes away the most. And of course, us in our own lives. So there again, this is a very basic approach. And as we spoke about, we might think about it first for our kids. What do our kids need? What does my partner need? What do my spouse might need? But in these times of COVID-19 and with all the unrest that we have going on, sometimes we just have to focus on the basics, and we have to go back to the basics as far as how this works. The one word that I wanted to get you to pay attention to up there is oxytocin. And if you Google oxytocin there, you'll find a bunch of different TED Talks and a bunch of different articles about it. And it's called the hug hormone or the love hormone. And it's one of those pieces which really is just a fundamental building block to our everyday conversations, our everyday relationships. It's probably why when we all checked in and you were trying to do this first 30 minutes and you just wanted to see somebody on the screen, and it might have been frustrating that, well, why aren't they on the screen? I don't want to type and chat, and we're all navigating through this, right? But even seeing someone on the screen, or even if you're 6 feet away, and if you can make eye contact, and if it's just through a mask, it's been shown that eye contact and just those kind of interactions can also help with oxytocin, which of course reduces our stress, makes us feel a little bit more connected. That can happen if you're living alone, and if you have a pet, those sorts of things happen there. So there again, it might be a little bit simplistic, but this is the stuff which is really going on, which over the last 7 months we've figured out I'm missing a lot. And I know some things specifically that I'd like to put back in my life, but when I miss those kind of friendships, those face-to-face kind of pieces, this is the kind of Wizard of Oz of things that often happen in our brain as far as why our mood and our emotional reaction might be a little bit different during these times. Anything else that you want to say about this?
I was going to add one other thing. It's part of the reason why we've all been so drawn to comfortable clothing is not just because we don't want to put the effort into getting ready, but also that it is soothing and it's comforting to have that just that level of comfort when we don't have the physiological touch that comes along with this. So as I mentioned a little bit ago, social media and screen time. We have had to really shift recently our modes for connection, as we are seeing here, right? We need to use these resources to connect with one another rather than being able to see a big group face to face. it's really important, I think, to determine and to know the difference between social connectedness and what is just social media or screen time. In general, people who spend more time on screen-related activities are more unhappy. So there's a statistic that people who spend between 6 to 9 hours on screens or on social media specifically are roughly 50% less happy than people who don't. And I think if we think about the difference between something like this versus something like Facebook, Instagram, a whole host of social media outlets, is that those are, number one, they're very surface level and you're just observing. There's not as much of a sense of interaction. And if you are, if any of you have seen the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, which I could talk for hours about, it really talks about how those social media applications were created using behavioral psychology. So although on the surface, right, they present with the opportunity to really, really connect with people and reach out to people that you haven't talked to since high school, their actual purpose is for advertisements and to get you to click and to get you to respond. And so eventually they actually become addictive over time, and that pulls you away from true connection with people. And so it's challenging because a lot of people over the last several months have immediately turned to that. So what can we do is we can find opportunities for face-to-face connection with other people, right? We can, if you live in different states than other people, as mentioned, I've moved many places, so not many of my friends are here, but even though we live in different time zones, we're able to have Zoom happy hours, or we schedule regular FaceTime date night with, another couple that we're friends with. Also, in terms of staying active, you can schedule to FaceTime someone and go on a walk at the same time, or be part of a virtual fitness class or something like that. So it's really important, I think, to take a step back and really look at what are the things that are enabling you to connect with other people? What is the true purpose behind them? And can you be more maybe intentional about what you are doing, connecting with either specific people rather than on these big platforms where there really isn't any intentional connection?
Can I just say something about, so my big plug for the documentary Social Dilemma, as Blair mentioned, I have 3 kids aged 12, 14, and 16. And as we watched that as a family about 2 weeks ago, I can tell you that my 14 and 16-year-old that night got off of TikTok. And it was just because they were, when they saw what happened back behind the scenes and why it was there and who was benefiting and how it was maybe manipulating their behavior and of course their opinions and their time, it's a really neat thing to see, and it's a smart thing for us as parents to really look at. And the last thing I would say about that is, as a psychologist, I usually focus with folks saying, all right, you have to focus on what you will do. If you focus so much on what you won't do and don't do this and don't do that, that's usually not very helpful. This is the one time where we have to be flexible and look at this. We've talked about with something that is as addictive as social media or just screen time or our phones, sometimes it's healthier just to say, all right, there's going to be 45 minutes, maybe once or twice a day, where as a family, we're not going to use the phones. And we're just going to put the phones in a basket and they're just going to go there. So I guess you could say, this is what we are going to do, but you're actually saying we're not going to do the screens. But you have to be very intentional as far as we're going to put them away, see if we can do 45 or 60 minutes, heaven forbid, in putting those down. And of course, if you've experienced that, you're amazed on what the child will do, what the family will do, or even what we will do, because we might get sucked into that as well. We might worry about our kids and their screen time, but we of course have to look at our own selves and our own patterns.
So thinking forward, there have been a lot of questions for people of how are we going to connect with the holidays coming up? Because this is the biggest time when we generally see family, we see friends. And I think rather than, again, going backwards to what we were talking about earlier, rather than thinking forward and viewing it kind of in a pessimistic sort of, there are no opportunities, there are no possibilities. How can we look at that and make the best decisions for our family that will work? You know, it is a challenging time because there's, generally speaking, there's a lot of people indoors and there's lots of travel. So it does make it a higher risk time of year for everyone. But I think what's essential here, and kind of tying this back to the social media, is that everyone needs to make the best decision for yourself that you can. Whatever, you know, sitting down with your family, seeing, are there higher risk people in your families? Are there ways to get together in large outdoor spaces so that you can connect with one another? Unfortunately, a lot of social media outlets have become a source of some online shaming and cruelty, and looking at people and saying, you know, oh, these many people aren't wearing masks and they're not socially distancing. And that unfortunately results in this, or encourages this kind of cancel culture where it's like, this person doesn't agree with what I believe, so automatically we're no longer friends. Whereas I think it's a really great opportunity to choose and model compassion for one another, and acknowledging that it's okay if other people don't have the same viewpoints as you do. You just choose not to meet with them in person, schedule a Zoom call if they're one of your good friends. And there are a number of different options that you can choose, you know, safest being video conferencing like this and meeting with a large group of people. But then, you know, if there are families that choose to travel long distances, you can look at, okay, maybe do we drive rather than flying? You know, there's been a lot of families that have taken tests before going, or had a period of quarantine once they get somewhere. So really, I think in terms of looking forward and seeing possibilities, there are a number of ways to approach this. It's just what's going to be the best decision for your family.
So Matt and Bryn, I have a couple of questions that I thought I would let you know, and before you go on. Okay, so one of the questions is, it's hard because I'm used to 7 hours a day alone. Now everyone is home. My husband golfs and has hours on end alone that I don't get. What do I do? I'll give you a second one too, which is a little more specific. And that one is, my son is 9 and has done 6 of 12 IVIG for recently diagnosed PANS after 5 years of ADH prescriptions. Trying times for him and everyone else who knows him. So recognize that one may be hard to answer at this point, but, and then also there's been some questions, and I'll just say that in the documentary you mentioned was A Social Dilemma. A lot of people sound like they're very interested in seeing that on Netflix.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on those 2 questions?
Sure. Do you want to speak just briefly to the PANDAS, even though we can't go into that, or just?
Was there a specific question to it, or was it more of a comment?
It was probably more of a comment, but I think the question is if I'm reading into this, did the ADHD medication possibly impact that? Sure.
Well, I can imagine if that many rounds of IVIG, I can imagine that is a very challenging bout of PANDAS that you're managing. So my thoughts are with you. And I don't think that there, to this point, is any literature on stimulant medication impacting the course of PANDAS. It's possible that, you know, the delayed diagnosis could make the episode a little bit more severe, but in general, stimulant medication hasn't been shown to increase the symptoms of that, if that answers the question.
But it is very frustrating. One of the things that we found is, you know, it's really tough for families and kids with that kind of diagnosis and that set of symptoms to have a medical home. When you look at how so many other childhood chronic illnesses over many, many decades, people have been able to specialize, they've been able to go to a place and your child can get treated in a very total way. We're not there yet with PANDAS, which is pretty frustrating, and part of the reason why you might have to explore kind of who your docs are and who your kind of support team is with that. So, and then the other piece, which, you know, I think was a great point as far as the one person who said, I used to spend 7 hours a day at home. Now it's probably 0 or darn close to it. And this woman's husband goes out and plays golf just very often, and he has hours on end. Okay, well, I could make fun of men, and that might be a good way to do that. It is important, you know, during these times. It's, you know, one of the things I say to my adolescent clients or the families I work with is, you know, remember last year when mom and dad used to say, well, so how was school? You know, when you used to go to school and everything else, and some kids would talk about it, some kids wouldn't. I'm like, guess what? If you're going back to school, or if you're online this fall in school, whenever, it's probably pretty fair that since everything's so different, we probably don't need to say, oh, nothing, everything's fine. Like everything is new, and we need to stay on top of that. So my example would be for that woman whose husband goes out and plays golf. You might be able to have a brief conversation, say, all right, look, here we are. It's in month 7, and now the kids are back to school. It's the fall, and I used to be at home for 7 hours a day, and we just need an updated kind of conversation to see how much golf could make sense versus, you know, we're really using that voice. I need some time by myself, and no matter how that might look, and doing it, because I can really empathize with that as far as knowing when people talk about being an introvert or an extrovert, you know, the basic understanding that I have with that is what things give you energy. So if being an introvert, that would give you energy. So what you're telling me in that question is there's really not a lot of time, or my environment really doesn't give me a lot of energy, which is a problem. And I applaud you for bringing up the question, and for even trying to insert some of that solo time, maybe with a give and take with your husband and with a family situation. Very, very tough.
I think that it ties really nicely into what we were talking about with boundaries, of just being willing to say, you know, you can have a conversation of saying this, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be that you're managing those 7 hours now all by yourself. And that's not happening on the other side. So as I mentioned on that lean in page, I think there's a lot of really good pointers and ideas of how to communicate that without, I can say personally, having conversations like that, sometimes my anger tends to seep in if I get a little too far. And so I think there's probably on those websites, there's some good phrases and terms to use so it can stay pretty neutral, rather than coming from what appears to be like a resentful or frustrated place, which is totally warranted to feel that feeling. But then the conversation doesn't have to have that emotional lens to it.
Well, speaking of boundaries, there was one person who really appreciated your mentioning that you shouldn't be working at your kitchen table, and identified that boundaries are really difficult to set. So certainly going to the Lean In website would be great. And the other question, so again, along the boundaries, it goes back to something you said earlier about setting boundaries is modeled by God in the Bible. And this person was wondering if you could give an example of God setting boundaries in the Bible. Now, we're not expecting you to be able to pull up.
All right. What do you got, Dr.
I don't
Moore?
know if I can come up with a specific verse, but I think that if I can go off the cuff here, I think it to me anyways, it's clear that there are certain things that are my responsibility, and certain things that can be left to God, right? Like preparing for this presentation, for example, that is not necessarily God's responsibility. He can speak through me to make sure that I'm communicating his message and coming from a place that is sharing his light. But it was my responsibility to take the time to prepare for this presentation, right? That is my responsibility and within my boundary. Hopefully
Thank you. Thank you. All right.
Well, and we could go off the cuff just real quickly. I mean, so we were supplied with 10 commandments, which are very clear. And the one thing with anger, I've done talks, I've worked with my own church group about anger of all different genders and all different ways of looking at it. And if you look at the Old Testament, even though some people view it as like a fire and brimstone, and it was many examples of God's anger, one of the clarities you can see in some of those readings is it's really God is usually he's clear with the anger, usually tries to be patient. But the one thing which in the Old Testament God tells us through the scriptures is if you are going to prey on the powerless and on those who are oppressed, that's when you're going to feel his power back. He's going to try to be patient in so many other things. But that's kind of the clarity which I at least get from some of the scriptures, whether it has to do with anger or whatever our kind of emotional response can be.
And I think if you want further examples, Henry Cloud and John Townsend have a series of books on boundaries. I believe Henry Cloud might also have a podcast on boundaries, but that book is filled with biblical examples. And there's also a book on teaching your teenagers boundaries and teaching your kids boundaries from the same authors.
Okay, so we'll get those references from you, and we'll post it on the church website then. Okay, thank you. Okay, so you guys can go on now with your presentation. Thank you.
Make sure we have some time.
Yeah. So there was a question before the presentation just about feeling isolated, especially when a main source of connection had been volunteer work and reaching out into the community. And so I think, as Matt was saying, this is a time where we're feeling we don't really have a place to unite our frustration towards. So this could be a really great opportunity to unite against the effects of the pandemic, through people who have suffered exceptional unemployment or loss or things like that. And so I just included some opportunities on here, donating, volunteering in safe situations. There are a number of websites, especially in and around Richmond, of things that you can go and do, of delivering meals to the elderly, making phone calls to the elderly just to check in to see how they're doing. And there are a number of other things on here. I think one that's very interesting and unique is a virtual opportunity called Be My Eyes. And so it is a nationwide, it's just an app. And what you do is it connects blind and low vision individuals with sighted volunteers. And so let's say someone needs to leave their house and they lost their wallet and they can't find it. And so if you have the app, they'll call, and the call goes out, I think, to a number of different people. I don't know exactly how it works. But essentially what they're doing is FaceTiming you. And if you're in a position where you can answer, they'll tell you, oh, I lost my wallet, or I'm trying to make my lunch and I can't find the bread. So they'll turn their phone around and you are their eyes for them. So you will guide them through, it's a little bit to your left, reach your arm up higher. And I just think it's a really interesting and unique opportunity where you do get that sense of connection and you're helping people. You don't necessarily need to be near them. Add anything to it?
The one thing I would say, do we know how to go backwards in this presentation? Yeah. So one of the things, and we're just going to scoot back quickly. One of the first slides that we're trying to use our sense of humor, and in a way we were trying to overwhelm you. Like, this is one of the most overwhelming slides, right? It's like, why do we invite these psychologists to be here if they're just going to give us a bunch of circles and everything else? But it's good to know, all right, this is how overwhelming it can really feel. But when it comes to, well, what can I do now? I used to volunteer here. I used to do this. I used to do that. For now, and for I don't know how long, I can't do it. I'm a very visual person. So it's like, if I used to do something in the local environment, in the formal networks, and if I can't for a variety of reasons, because it's not safe, it's not smart, I don't have time, I need it. What I would make us consider is, well, how can you go closer into those circles? Because I can still give time to people, and I can still feel good for the way that I'm passionately giving time to others while trying to take care of myself. But whereas it used to be maybe farther out on the edges of this circle, if we take it in and if we get a little bit closer to our cultural groups, our church, and maybe double down and do more with your church, or if it's with your immediate family or household, or what I've experienced is just within my neighborhood. In the last 7 months, I haven't seen my neighbors this much in years. And it's because we're all there and we're walking together, and I'm taking a physical distance and I'm allowing it to just get smaller and kind of trying to do what I can do within that smaller realm there. If that makes any sense. And then our last one, to make sure we have some time, just want to throw this out there. So communicating with your children and family. I will say, we all know this, and in some ways it's simple, but as we all know, if you're a parent, is that it's hard, right? To know what to do and then to actually be able to do it takes a lot of practice, and we have to have some grace with ourselves. So be mindful of our own language and our own behaviors. So what other people hear from us is less important than what they see us do. Talking to your partner, talking to a close friend, talking to anybody who you know and trust about your own fears of what's going on right now. One of the things when you want to talk to your children, whether it's about the race situation, politics, anything going on in their classrooms, in the family, one of the things I would usually say is, so you want to be honest in an age-appropriate way. We psychologists are famous for saying age-appropriate way. They're like, yeah, well, tell me what that is. But it's kind of when our kids, so we want to foster a culture where our kids can hopefully can ask us questions, or they can respond back to us. And then the one reminder I've always had in my own head is, well, whatever my child asks me, especially if they're younger, answer that question. Specifically, answer that question. Don't let your own fears or your own don't take it to the next 2 or 3 topics with that because you're scared of something. Well, Josie, it's actually because of this. And then we quiet, right? And then we see if they're going to ask something back, and then not just kind of putting our own fears out there, because then they're sitting there looking at us all wide eyes, like, saying, well, I was worried about this, but now you have me worried about 6 different things, and I don't know how to get my head around.
And I guess Matt and Bryn, if there's something that you felt like you raced over in order to get to this time, maybe you circle back to there for a few minutes.
We can, and I know we kind of took it right up to our time as well. We want to make sure we gave time for everybody else as well.
So one of the questions that came up that I can answer is, this is so helpful. Will we be able to access a recording of this? And yes, you will. We're recording it. So
and maybe even though we are going to get you those resources. What was the name of that Boundaries book one more time?
Boundaries.
But by
Henry Cloud and John Townsend.
It's very, very popular.
Yes.
Okay, good. Terrific. So my screen is completely full, so I don't really know what time it is besides my crazy watch. So we've got a couple more minutes.
Okay. Anything that you felt that we glossed over, you want to go back?
I don't know if there's anything you'd like to discuss about more.
Nope.
All right, I have a comment. Well, I have now the questions are coming in. Good. Can you address the loss of sequences? I'm not sure what that is. And then also, any ideas about grandparents trying to Zoom grandchildren? I can't get my grandkids to talk on Zoom for more than 2 minutes. And then a comment is, this has been a great session, and the specific guidance, 3 minutes as an example is genius, as is the 45-minute example. So you want to build on any of those?
I think kind of back to what Matt was saying in terms of grandparents connecting with kids. I think if there are specific ways to make it possibly more structured, depending on the ages of the kids, There are a lot of opportunities through, I think there's something through Netflix where you can watch a movie together. I think there are opportunities where ways you can play certain games via FaceTime or via Zoom, so that it's more activities oriented rather than kind of unstructured time for talking. That's kind of what immediately comes to my mind. I don't know what else you think of.
I would, so some of the words that I've had to deal with as a parent, speaking with my wife and in my own, but especially with the kids is, one example I have is in the school setting. My kids go to public school. So in the spring, school just kind of went away and it came back in a different way. And it's going much better here in the fall. But what I think a lot of us have experienced is you might have a kid in 3rd grade and 5th grade and, 9th and 12th. And they didn't realize it, but their kind of expectations and their behaviors around school, they didn't realize how much it was predicated on seeing the teacher every period and talking to your parents and knowing that you had to do this. And when all that goes away, the kids usually have to, I would encourage my own kids to say, what are your own expectations? Because everything's kind of gone. It's all like a reset. So expectations, I think, are a good word for us to think about and maybe talk to our kids about, whether it's around school, depending on what their age is. And I think that goes to the piece with the grandparents. Hey, look, this is just what we do in our family. I know we didn't do it as much because we used to see our grandparents a little more, but we're not right now for smart and safe reasons. So it's really important to me that we kind of FaceTime them every day or 2 or 3. And I want you guys to, put things aside for 5 or 6 minutes and really kind of do it. Let them know what your own expectations are, stay firm with it. Because anytime we're trying to change new behavior, it's going to take any of us a while to be like, is this really the new rule? Is this really what, if we just kind of distract mom, she might kind of go somewhere else and I only have to do it for 3 minutes. But whenever we're doing a new behavior expectations for our kids, we have to stay on it for a pretty brief amount of time. We have to stay on it and let them know that we're pretty serious about it.
And I think we've talked a lot as a group and then with our clients, just that social skills in general, unfortunately, have plateaued a bit. As providers of virtual telehealth, we've all had some interesting experiences with kids, adolescents, adults, where you're talking to me while you're driving, or you are, you put the phone down on the desk and I can't see your face and I can tell that you're on the computer. And they're just, there's a lot of understanding of what the expectation is. So I think that's really important to continue to build those skills.
Okay, well, I have one last question for you because I know we're getting close to the end time. And is there something that you've heard from parents and clients and children that are, talking to you through telehealth? That's the theme. Is there one or two things that people come to you to talk about that we can learn from, in terms of, boy, I'm not going through this myself. Other people are experiencing this as well.
My first thought, I'll give you a minute to think.
Thank
there,
you.
Dr. Moore. My first thought is, and there again, this speaks to my personality, and I know we all try to do it, but it's hard sometimes. Ever since this hit, I think we've all heard the term silver linings an awful lot. Silver linings. Yeah. And what I've learned from my wife, because she's very good at it, and what we try to do as a family is we even try to, so they're not just silver linings. So we're like making, like, I've talked to people and they've brought the question up for me, okay, what do I want to be able to say I did when this is over? Because it keeps us kind of in the present tense. It's not about, I can't believe I can't do this in 6 months or this. It's kind of like, okay, it keeps us focused in the moment. What do I want to be able to say, even though there's a lot of really bad things and very difficult things, but what do I want to be able to say that I did, whether it was a new hobby, whether it was, my wife, even though the kids are online at home in the fall, she gets to have lunch with them almost every day. And that's a gift if you have a 7th, 9th, and 11th grader. So that's not just a silver lining, but that's a benefit. And there might be ways that our child, there's terrible things from them being pulled out of school, but we're trying to find either the silver linings or take those linings and just kind of make them a little bit wider and kind of, if there's good things to do, we're trying to make the best of them.
I think.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think one of the things that I've heard, especially coming from the neuropsychological perspective that I've heard both in therapy and from testing, is that this situation has really tested kids, adolescents, adults' executive functioning systems.
Okay.
So when all of our schedules and our structure was pulled away, and I saw this even for my most high achieving adolescent clients, that when when I was living in Texas, they continued with online learning in the spring, but they removed grades. So even my hardest working kids were like, well, I'm not going to do this if I'm not getting an A on it. Like, what is the point in doing it then? And so I think this can, as Matt was saying, this can be a really great opportunity for all of us to learn how, when you have unlimited amounts of time, seemingly, how do you structure that yourself? Because it's an essential skill, particularly once you get to college. And that's generally the time when we see if that executive functioning muscle isn't as strong. It's generally college when we start to see it, because otherwise people are very often tightly scheduled. So I think that can be really helpful, not only for children and adolescents, but also for adults, in terms of how can I structure my time that is not only, as I said, productive, but also energy giving. So like Matt was saying, scheduling time to be by yourself, scheduling time to connect with other people.
Well, I think that's a great way to end today, and to kind of summarize how we're going to, find those silver linings, and how do we keep learning, and how do we keep building our skills during this time. So thank you. I'm noticing all kinds of fabulous thank yous from everyone, in terms of, they've loved hearing from you and all the great advice. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us. It was our pleasure, and we'll be in touch with some of the resources. And if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to send those along as well.
Okay, well, thank you. And I know Blair is going to take us out today, and she's going to talk about next month. And also she's going to talk about, she's going to send us with a prayer. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt and Bryn, for a wonderful program and for being so responsive to our questions. And thank you, PW, for participating so openly in today's program. In these turbulent times, I'm sure you're as grateful as I am to have some new tools and techniques for ourselves and for our families as we strive to maintain good mental health and balance. I hope you'll check out the PW page on the website for details about next month's program and our speaker, Pastor Reuben Boyd, who will address the issue of Richmond clergy against racism. Mark your calendars now for Tuesday, November 11th. As we go about this week, I invite you to pray for our members and families who are on the church prayer list, those with health concerns, those recovering from surgery or medical procedures, those who are mourning the loss of a loved one, as well as those who are celebrating weddings and new babies. It's especially important during these times when we're physically distant to reach out to let our brothers and sisters know that we really are closer than they think. Now may we close our meeting in prayer. Father God, we are grateful that you love each of us, no matter our status or abilities. Thank you that you walk with children and families struggling against poverty, injustice, anxiety, and loneliness, calling us to do the same. Give our leaders wisdom to create solutions that empower all people to survive and thrive, and help us to answer your call to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with you. In Christ's name, amen.
Thank you. So we will see you next month on October 11th.
November 11th.
November 11th.
I mean, November 10th.
Okay, okay. Oh, gosh. Anyway, we'll see you soon.
Okay.